With me here is Carl Van Dyke, who is the architect, got involved in the renovation of this building. This is a school classroom, the first one available in West Windsor history. As a matter of fact, it was located originally over American Salem property. Today it's called Howard Hughes property. And in the early 1990s, I remember that was in 1994. I got the move to Clarksville Road, right next to Morris Hawk School. And it was placed there for a period of time. And then I remember it got really rotten. And the reason we moved there was because American Salem was talking about closing their facilities in early 1990s, in preparation for closing their facilities. So we have to move this schoolhouse to Morris Hawk School, right next to the school. There's a piece of property. We put it there, but for many years, nobody was able to do anything about it. And then when I took over Mayor's office, that was 2001, we start talking about we really need to preserve this piece of treasure in this community. The first classroom in West Windsor. So we tried to do whatever we could, get a little bit money and support from American Salem to again move this to the current size, and then pour the concrete to make sure there's a foundation. And then it took a while for township to decide whether we wanted to preserve everything from the very beginning, preserve all of the pieces of the wood frames and all of this, or we wanted to replicate the same structure, again, try to preserve all of the classroom facilities and again identify certain important pictures to be placed as part of this. And Carl, since you get involved, I would like to hear from you how you get involved, and again, what did you do to come to where we are today?
Right. So. Well, the story of this school building is amazing. Like you said, it came from over by Morris Hawk School. It was transported here and put onto a foundation near the old barn. And it sat on the foundation for several years. And we were doing the planning. We decided that the positioning of the schoolhouse was not appropriate next to the barn as much as it would have been normal to have a farmer donate a piece of land more towards the road. So we moved it closer to the road, which separates it now from the farm area. But the more important part to it is by the time the house got to this farmstead, it had a lot of renovations. It had pieces cut out of it. Some of its structure was compromised. And all the windows that were standard at the time when the house was built was taken out and new ones were put in. So it really didn't look like a schoolhouse. In fact, the ceilings were rather low. And what we did is a lot of research, a lot of study on this particular schoolhouse using pictures from the Historical Society. And we also work with the barn company in terms of looking at authentic types of windows and trim details that we used here. So with all of that, we put together the design for the new schoolhouse, which was not really design, we just sort of ad-libbed as we took the thing apart, because what we had to do is we had to take the building apart because we had to check all of the post and beam. It's a post and beam structure. So we had to check all the connections, and we had to rebuild some of them, and then we fabricated it here on the site at West Windsor. But the nice thing is that it's got a lot of, I mean, it really speaks to the whole community about education. A lot of people come to this community because of the educational opportunities that are here. And this is sort of where it started, in one-room schoolhouse where you learn math, and different children at different ages were in groups together, and they helped each other back and forth. And so the significance of this house here is more than most people think, because it has to do with the history of education, not only in the country, in the state, but here in West Windsor, New Jersey.
Based on what you just said, I found out two very important factors here. Number one, it really takes a very special skill, not just any architect who can do this kind of work, because you have to go back to history, you have to conduct the research, and then you have to compare, and you have to also look for materials. How you are going to be able to pull all of this together without missing anything, or try to minimize, that you either ignore or forget about this piece or that piece. And that is really very hard. And number two, I think you also point out, West Windsor, we are very proud of our educational systems here. The joint schools with Principal of West Windsor Principal of School Districts is one of the best in the whole state, or even in the whole nation. And it's so important for us to be able to show the first school classroom we have in West Windsor. And it speaks volumes in terms of this community, how we treasure education. And you can see a lot of pictures in this room, and a lot of people are still around in these communities. That's very interesting, and I really appreciate. I know when I took over Mayor's office, this was one of my headaches, how to take care of this building and how to make sure that we continue the tradition and move forward.
Well, in terms of the idea of how we do that, there is some specialties that we need as architects to do a building like this, but we really got a lot of assistance from people that knew specifically how joinery happens. For instance, in the ceiling here, you don't see it, but the way that the ceiling and the structure is made here is pretty much the way it was made back in the 1800s when it was built. And so there's a lot of people that went into this. It's hard to do in a municipal job to get the right builders to build this. And luckily we had somebody that helped us construct the framework here that really knew what they were doing and helped us along with that. So it was a team effort. I mean, to have the township behind it, to have the
right architects and also right carpenters to
Yes.
be able to pull all of this together.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a team effort. Yep.
That's right. And most importantly, we still have some of the residents in West Windsor who went through this classroom
Absolutely.
when they were little kids.
There's pictures up of drawings of theirs on the
That's
on the
right.
wall, and so it's a great time. This is a great place to be, and it's a great tribute to the farm life, because most of the people that went to schools like this were farmers, and their kids were farm children. So to have this right in the midst of the farmland, which is where West Windsor started, is an amazing thing, and everybody should be proud of this project.
Every time we talk about West Windsor history, people seem to only look around US 1. But what is really important here is, all of the farmlands we have and we preserve. As far as I know, right now, the whole West Windsor, we have more than 50% of the property preserved, either used for recreational sites, or farmlands, or wooded areas. So you can walk around in West Windsor and you feel that as if you live in a park.
Right.
And that's what West Windsor is all about. You have all of these old traditions, but at the same time you have high-tech and today's commercial operations along US 1.
Right. My hope, though, for this whole project is that the Historic Society would get some support to be able to maintain this site, to grow on it, and let this be something that everybody that was part of it, from the people that went to this school, that worked on this farm, that their memory and that it would honor them for the next 100 years would be great. Because that's basically what we tried to do here, is make a place where we forget about what agrarian society was like. We forget about what a one-room schoolhouse is about. And so to bolster up the Historic Society would be a great thing, getting new people in, to be able to maybe look at fundraising, to be able to have more children and adults come here and see this place would be my hope.
I agree with you. Actually, since I took over mayor's office, I've been working closely with Historical Society. And this is really a volunteer organizations with a lot of volunteers from this community. And they have been around, this organization started 30 some years ago. And those who started this society, they're still around and they try to do as much as they can based on their memories and also based on their connections, try to get all of the items we can see here today in this West Windsor History Museums, to be able to see how people do things 200 years ago, and you have a lot of farming machines collected in the past 200 years. Yep. You also have a lot of tools people used in the old days. And look at Schenck farmhouse. That's one of the few historic houses available in the whole state of New Jersey, I have to say, because it started 1730s. Right. Yeah, and going through the three expansion renovation. And today we try to preserve as much as we can on this compound. Another very important structure I also wanted to mention is Dutch British barn. And as far as I know, that was built in 1750s. And today we even have the replica on display over Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And this is something this community should be very proud of. It. We have our first classroom here, and we have one of the few complete barns with the English and the Dutch design here. And then we also have one of the oldest farmhouses in the whole state, and that's Schenck farmhouse.
And what's nice about it, with all that we did here to make it a living museum, a walk-through museum, is we put a restroom in, so we have the opportunity to have more people here, and have accommodations for those folks. So it's a good mix. It's a good project. It's a great use of funding, and a great honor to the history of West Windsor.
And we definitely can also take advantages of this compound. Hopefully we can use this for fundraising activities to make sure we will be able to continue to move in this direction. And again, definitely would like to see more younger generations, new fresh blood to take over the volunteer functions of this compound in the future.
The other nice feature that we've included into the whole farmstead is in the main barn, we took one portion of that, which was not part of the 1700s part, more part of the 1800s part, and we used that to create an environmental education center, which allows people to look at not only the environment around in West Windsor, but also it gives a glimpse of what maybe a general store may have been like, and it again bolsters the whole idea of letting people that have not experienced it, what used to be like to have an older community, and also to learn more about the environment of this community.
I think that's a very important part of this, because when we talk about history, it's not just human histories. We also talk about natural histories in this community. I think we were so lucky a few years ago when we had developers coming to West Windsor. Of course, today it's called Elements at West Windsor. The developers, as one of the conditions, they were asked to donate $1,000 per house they sold, and make that as a contribution to the township to develop these environmental education centers. And I'm very happy to see the final results last year when we have the official sign West Windsor History Museum open. They also have all of this on display early this year. And as you can see, you're going to see all of the natural histories here in West Windsor, going back to, not only a few hundred years. It really goes back to the whole history of United States, all of the animals and some of the species you don't usually see, and you're going to be able to even touch some of the furs to make sure you really get a very direct feeling and experience about the history of West Windsor. Hi, Donna.
Hi.
Well, good to see you. Again, I just wanted to introduce to all of you Donna Vivency, who is a resident living in West Windsor for generations. So she's familiar with a lot of things going on and so many items in this first classrooms in West Windsor. As a matter of fact, her picture is somewhere in this room. But again, it's more than that. She probably still remembers some of the things when she was much younger, the old days, you know, exactly what's going on in this classroom. So, Donna, would you be able to just give a brief summary of your experience?
Right, well, I was never a student in this actual building because these were from the late 1800s, and there were 4 of them in 1875. One was in Dutch Neck, one was in Penn's Neck, one in Edinburgh, and then this building was on Clarksville Road, right next to the Morris Hawk School. Now, many of the people who live here now say Maurice Hawk School, but
Yeah,
Mr.
Morris
Hawk always went by Morris Hawk. So this building was there, and then it was used as a residence. And when it was sold, luckily they did not demolish it. It was brought up here to this property and lovingly restored. So there are all kinds of desks in here from different eras, and we have all kinds of pictures around. So if people come to visit, they can see different classrooms. And this was called the Parsonage School. And we're not sure why it was called the Parsonage School, but there are things in the minutes that they set aside $300 to do this school. So a lot of the schools were built way back in the early 1700s, but this one was more around the late 1800s. And so there are many pictures around here. We're fortunate to have a picture of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln that used to be in every classroom. Right. So it's been restored what it would have been like. It would have been a one-room schoolhouse with one teacher. And the people who owned the property saved the original stove. So the stove that's here is the original stove. So we're fortunate to have that. The teacher would have had to stoke the fire, carry in the water, and of course there were outhouses in those days, no indoor plumbing. And there are some other things that would have been part of the school back then, the school bell, the chalkboard. But then later you talked about my picture. I did live here as a child. I was actually here a baby when the Martians landed and lived in Grover's Mill, one of the few people that were there and still here. But we went to Dutch Neck School. Not this one, but the newer one. And it was then an 8-room school. And in 4th grade, the teacher had us draw each of our individual portraits, and were pictures on that train that's over there. And a lot of us are still in the community. My name then was Donna Maxwell, and so I'm there with very blonde hair.
Left-hand side,
the
number
4th
4.
one in. And the woman who saved this, my classmate, was Lois Tyndall. Her name is now Stuller, and she had a twin brother. And her twin brother's name is Kenneth, and he's one of the engineers up in the front. And Kenny was homesick, so when the teacher took it down from the wall, she rolled it up and sent it home with Kenny because so he could see this. And so all these years, her mother saved this and gave it to her, so it's a real treasure. When they decided to put it on the wall, we didn't know why it was called the Silver Streak, because those days we'd go to the railroad station and there'd be freight trains that went through. No freight trains go through Princeton Junction now, but back in those days, freight trains went through. So we would go and watch the trains, nothing fancy like this. So we didn't know why it was called the Silver Streak. And one day I had a group here, and the man came up to me afterwards and said, when he was a young boy, he had a train called the Silver Streak. Oh. And I said, was it a Lionel? And he said, no, American Flyer. And so, and it had 3 cars and the red engine. So I guess that's how we got the Silver Streak.
Donna, when you look around all of these school chairs, and desks or tables, they all look so tiny. Compared by today's standards, looks like
Well, that's
totally
true.
different.
There are different sizes, so if you see way up in the front, there are little tiny ones, but you have to remember when there was a one-room schoolhouse, the children started when they were 5, and they went all the way up to 8th grade. And even when, and there was one teacher teaching all those grades. Now, a lot of the children didn't go through 8th grade because if they had a farm, they may had to work on the farm. But even when I went to school in the new Dutch Neck School, we all went on the same school buses. There were only about 6 or 8 of them. And we started when we were 5 years old. They didn't call it kindergarten, they called it reception grade. We went all day long, and we rode on the same buses with all the kids all the way up to 8th grade. And so then Dutch Neck School was just an 8-room schoolhouse, and they've added on to that. But that's why there's different size desks, because they have gotten these desks from various places. But some of them are much older than others, and sometimes when we have visitors, they come in and they tell us stories about other one-room schoolhouses and that they have donated things. So many people, even outside of West Windsor Township, have donated things to this. And they tried to make the tables that would look, that would have been from this era, to put the pictures from different eras on there. So people can come and see relatives. We have people who come and find their grandparents or their great-grandparents. So it's really wonderful to have people come and visit. So.
Yeah, another thing I also noticed all of the pictures here. West Windsor, every time we talk about diversity, we always make that as one of the very important things that the whole community, we all feel very proud of. And I noticed all of these pictures inside. You also notice from a very early age in this community, we actually have a mix of different, racial groups in the classroom here.
Right.
So is that?
Well, even way back when I was in school, we always had the children that would come just for a couple of months because their family would be farm workers.
Yeah, yeah.
So they would come and they would pick potatoes or do other crops, and they may only be here for 3 or 4 months, and then they'd move to another state. So even on our train, we have, I remember a gal named Cherry Mae Stevens, and her picture is on there. And she came back year after year, and actually she did graduate from 8th grade. We have a picture of her in 8th grade, so she did come back. But when I moved into Princeton in 6th grade, from Dutch Neck School, that was the first year they integrated the Princeton schools. Mm-hmm. And that to me was not anything unique. It was called the Princeton Plan, but it wasn't unique because we had been integrated out here for many years. Yeah. So back then we didn't have we didn't have Asian families, or we didn't have many Indian families, but we always did have diversity. And some of these families have been here for generations, and others haven't. So it's been a wonderful place. I'm glad I grew up in the 50s. I'm not old enough to have been in this building, but I'll have a lot of people that come in and visit, and they look at that map, and they try to figure out what year that map was printed, because we can't find a date on it. But people say, oh, well, you can tell by the different countries because they've all changed.
You are right. Because look at, when you have Soviet Union, definitely
right.
It have to be after 1914 or 15.
Mm-hmm. And it has to be around the 50s because Israel is on there, and so so people stand and look at that. But
again, you have to be after World War II, because I also noticed Asians before World War II there were quite a few islands considered to be part of Japan, but now this map didn't show any. The Japan it is what it is today. Today,
yeah. Well, even when I was in Dutch Neck School, which that train was we probably did that in like 1948. We used to do air raid drills and sit in the hall and keep our heads down and that kind of thing, because it wasn't too long after World War II. And even when I moved into Princeton that year, 48, 49, we still had air raid drills for the school, which is very different than the kids going to school now, you know. So, so I hope a lot of kids come and visit and see what it was like. I hope they don't think I'm old enough to have been here in the 1800s, but it's interesting to show them the different pictures and to know that the school teacher had to stoke the stove and bring in the water and all of that. And I love to show people the rules for the school teacher. There's a thing over there that lists the rules for the school marm. If it was a male teacher, he could have a night off for courting, or 2 nights for courting if he was engaged. If it was a female teacher and she was married, that was the end of her job. She wasn't allowed to be here. So that's why they always talk about the school marm, because they were always single women, because they weren't allowed to be married. And there are a bunch of rules. If they do certain things or go into certain kind of stores, they can be fired. So people often take a picture on their camera of the rules for the teachers. So
very interesting. Actually, if you really wanted to talk about the future of this community, you need to learn about what's the history of this town, and so learn from the past, and then learn how to look forward to the future.
Well, it's wonderful now to be here today and see the cornfields out the windows, because, you know, that's the way it would have been back then. The farm would have been right around. They built these schoolhouses so they were close to the people's farms, because the kids would come. Many of them had to walk to school. And that's why there were 4 or 5 in the township, and there were some further out. But they would have walked to school. They would have done chores in the morning. So I know even when I was in school, there were kids that worked on the farm early in the morning and went home to work on the farm. So,
Okay, very good.
so West Windsor is a wonderful place, and it's changed a lot over the years. It was all farm fields pretty much when I was young, but we're glad to have all the new people here and hope that they enjoy our heritage.
Of course, we continue to try to preserve our heritage and our history.
Right, and it's, you know, it's wonderful that all this has been restored, so thank you for your part in that.
Dan, I know you got very much involved in the preparation, design, and also planning of this environmental education centers as part of this history museums. And the way I view it, when we talk about histories, it's not just human histories, it's also natural histories. And here in these rooms, I know we received the contribution from one of the developers in West Windsor with $150,000. And then we used the money to create these environmental education centers. To me, the whole idea is for children growing up in this community. Not only they understand the past, the history, but also they understand the kind of natural environments we have in this community. And it looks very impressive when you walk in. Of course, this is not a big museum, but just enough for the kids and the people in this town to be able to say, hey, this is what we used to have, and some of them might not be here anymore, but overall, this is what we have as part of the whole entire ecosystems in the whole state of New Jersey. We want to talk a little bit about what we got here and what people can learn from this, all of these displays.
Sure. I think you're absolutely correct that this room, this exhibit, the environmental education exhibit, kind of takes you from the historical past of the township, and it includes a 1920s general store part of it that was on loan from the New Jersey State Agriculture Museum. But it takes you from that through the idea of farming historically, but also farming as an environmental land use in the township, and the different issues that the farmers deal with environmentally, and then through to the open space initiatives of the present and the future in the community. The overlying theme of it is that West Windsor is a community that wants to be a sustainable community, and that we're growing green together, that the environment and the people and the animals that live in the town all together are inhabiting this community. And so there are exhibits about farming and the past of the community in farming, but also talking about the open space initiatives, largely of your administration and just before your administration, the Green Belt, which is a hugely prominent part of West Windsor Township, and the fact that there are many other animal species, as you talked about the natural history, that have and presently live in the community, including some species that we'd consider invasive that really didn't belong here, but they are here. And so the exhibit is designed to help children as they're touring the facility, that's the focus, to learn about that history from an environmental point of view and kind of take you from the past through the present into the future and help them ultimately learn about things like that and what they can do to be a contributor to the sustaining an environment in West Windsor that's really healthy for everyone.
We are one of the few municipalities being, awarded with the so-called Sustainable Jersey program and sustainable communities.
Right.
And that's why we have almost, over 50% of the West Windsor land is being preserved either as a wooded area and farmland or recreational facilities. And I think what is important here is I still remember when I got involved in the environmental commissions in the later part of 80s. That was the time we created the Green Belt. And this Green Belt, I know we are the first one in the whole state of New Jersey to create this concept. And today, this is one of the major reasons we still preserve a lot of wildlife in West Windsor. As a matter of fact, one summer I walked from headwater of Little Bear Brook to Alexander Road, and I walked through all of the wooded areas. And there were quite a few animals. I look around in these rooms, I was able to see some of the animals directly, and they probably found out, gee, who is this guy coming here? But again, definitely it's something we all should be very proud of, and I like to see all of this continue to stay in West Windsor. And I don't know whether you can explain a little bit about exactly, say, anybody who come here, exactly what they will be able to learn from all of the displays.
Actually, starting with what you were speaking of with the Greenbelt, there's an exhibit on the Greenbelt that talks about the Greenbelt, the history of the Greenbelt, and how it is actually a prominent part of West Windsor Township that many people don't realize. I think we've had this discussion where when you come to West Windsor, one of the first things you really think of is how green this community is. And the Greenbelt is a huge contributor to that, because the Greenbelt connects all the streams in between all the residential neighborhoods and through some of the commercial areas, so that a deer or a raccoon or a fox can basically walk all throughout the community through these interconnected belts of green, open space in the community. And it's really a tremendous asset. It makes it so that the native species other than humans in this community can sustain themselves here, as well as making it so that we have cleaner air and cleaner water so we can sustain the human populations as well. So there's an exhibit on that. We have some taxidermied native animals here, as well as other specimens that are on loan from the New Jersey Natural History Museum, which is really fantastic. So you can come and see those. And we have some different coats from other native animals that children or people can touch and get a feel for, because they're the type of things you really can't, you don't get the experience of interacting with them. So it's neat to be able to touch their fur and get a better feel for what they're like by doing that. But beyond that, it also, as I mentioned, gets into the history of farming and the fact that farming, that the entire community was farmed at one time. And it goes even further back. It goes back to the time of the native peoples here and how they farmed the land. The idea that they did some slash and burn farming in the woods, and that they employed different things like Three Sisters farming, which is where you would have summer squash and corn and beans growing together, and that they would interact with each other and help each other sustain and produce a crop. So it talks about their practices and how the practices of the European settlers of this area throughout the years did farming in the community, and the environmental impacts or benefits of that up to today. And then there's some interactive things where people can look at some of the crop seeds and understand what those seeds are like and what they feel like. There's an exhibit on species that are invasive or threatened or endangered, and some of the things that you may not even realize are invasive, like cats. The house cat actually it can be an environmental issue if you let your cats outside, because they can go after songbirds and things of that sort. So there's lots of really interesting things like that, and ultimately it ends up with an exhibit where it talks about how would you develop the township, where would you put residential and greenbelt and open space to get that balance, how would you do it? So there's actually an interactive map with magnetic pieces that children can put together. So there's a part on that as well. So there's lots of interactive things where they can draw pictures of the animals in the display case and maybe make a quilt for it and things like that. And we have a volunteer that's going to be working on some worksheets and things to kind of interface with the school curriculum, so that as school kids come through here, there's some lessons that teachers may be able to work at with the interactive exhibits to bring it full circle, so that the kids can learn about the history of the present and the future of what they can do to help sustain West Windsor.
Yeah, actually, when I took over mayor's office, that was one of my highest priorities. I would like to have a place where the kids growing up in this community, they can learn the whole history about this town and even the natural environments about this town. And I think finally we have this place, plus, together a whole history museums to be able to use to educate the kids growing up, or even people living in this community who didn't know very much about it. And I'm very happy about it. As a matter of fact, when I got involved in the Greenbelt issues, one of the things we were joking about it is whether there's any way we can connect it from east side of the Route 1 to the west side of the Route 1. And that is the missing linkages.
Yes.
And I don't know, I know in the water, you have fish ladders. You can help the fish to go from one lower area to higher area with fish ladder. Is any possibility if we have sidewalks or like a bridge across US 1, someday there might be a possibility for animal to be able to just walk through?
There are things like that around. We don't have those, or we don't have any of those planned. Unfortunately, Route 1 isn't too wide that in times like late in the evening and stuff, I think there is the possibility that some of the larger animals can cross the highway. And then there's also, as you know, there's culverts underneath where the water passes through, that some of the smaller animals can pass across the highway. So there are man-made barriers to the Greenbelt, but largely the Greenbelt is large enough, wide enough, and massive enough so that these species, during times when there's a lot of human activity, they can, live in the woods largely and wait for times when we're kind of sleeping.
They're smart enough to find out the right time.
Move around. And they get around. They move around. I think I see all different types of animals. I've seen fox, and you see turkeys and deer.
Yes.
And it's incredible the diversity of animals that are in this community. And I think largely because of the greenbelt, that we have a really strong greenbelt.
That's correct. Green belts actually extended to almost every corners of West Windsor.
Absolutely.
But what is really important is, again, the open space preservations and the farmland preservations. And all of this combined together, we have over 50% of preserved open space in West Windsor. And that's why I think this is something we all should be very proud of it. This is not only a community for human beings, but also a community for wildlife. And we should be able to all live together.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
you're it's like I said, when you come here, your first impression, what a green community, and it's a jewel. I mean, for this community, for now and forever. I mean, because it's preserved.
Yes.
And just the idea that it's here, and that, I mean, more and more you see studies coming out talking about how living amongst nature, no, not that you're living in the woods, but living with green around you just improves the physical and mental health of humans so much. That it's such an improvement on the welfare of the community, of the residents of the township. It's almost immeasurable what the benefit is. So it's a fantastic thing that this town has done.
Well, and this is what a sustainable community is all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
creating that balance. You want to have a
Yeah.
balance of the environment and of social interaction and of economic opportunities in the community. And that's what sustainability is all about. And West Windsor, I think, has done a tremendous job of balancing those things out and really growing towards becoming more and more of a sustainable community where these things all are balanced and neither overwhelms the other. It's been a pleasure working
And
with the community for
Very frankly, I'm
20
so
years.
happy to have you working for the community.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
my pleasure.
Yeah, it's
We
been a
really enjoy
Great
it.
asset and nice experience working with you.
Thank you. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's been really great.